Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the 6th round of the Exactcross series which took place in Loenhout. With me here to discuss that is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Racing got underway in Loenhout, which was a bit muddy on some sections of the course, and Mathieu van der Poel had the best start. Tom Pidcock had a pretty terrible getaway from the line, but with an audacious move into the first corner, he managed to go into the field as third. Van der Poel put in a blistering first lap, which would eventually be the fastest lap of the race, and he immediately put Van Aert under pressure. He made a mistake which also held up Pidcock. Eventually, towards the end of the lap, Van der Poel made a small mistake on the stairs, which led to Van Aert coming back. Pidcock also came back, but Pidcock had a terrible place in the pitbox. The side where they changed bikes, it was actually quicker to ride through the pits than to ride on the course, but Pidcock's position made it super terrible for him, so it was a lose-lose situation no matter if he changed bike or kept on riding. Pidcock suffered from that a couple of times and he was constantly yo-yoing off the back of Van Aert and Van der Poel. For a couple of laps we had a pretty similar scenario unfolding every lap. Van der Poel would try and attack on the technical sections and Van Aert would come back on the muddy sections. Pidcock would usually come back when the pace dropped on the long start-finish straight. Eventually, with a couple of laps to go, Van der Poel looked to open a serious gap, but somehow Van Aert also managed to close this. Pidcock made a big mistake in the mud and looked to be out of it. However, going into the penultimate lap, the pace was super low on the start-finish straight and Pidcock managed to come back together again. Despite an attack in the penultimate lap by Van der Poel, they also went into the final lap with all three. In that final lap, Van Aert was the first to place an attack, but it seemed more the case that he wanted to be in front on some of the technical sections to avoid an attack by Van der Poel. However, he couldn't avoid that attack by Van der Poel as he placed it on the second technical part of the course. He opened a gap there of 5 seconds. He looked to have it in the bag as they went towards the second pit zone, but on the super deep, muddy section before the second pit zone, he landed in a deep rut and got catapulted into the barriers. He didn't crash, but he was held up significantly enough to allow Van Aert to come back. Both riders went very deep and that allowed Pidcock to come back. We went down to a royal sprint between three on the long start-finish straight. Van Aert launched with a couple of 100 meters to go from the third wheel of the group, and his speed was absolutely insane. Van der Poel was unable to respond to that, and the same went for Pidcock. Van Aert took the win ahead of Van der Poel and Pidcock. Issam, we are being treated with some amazing duels. What was your thought on Van der Poel's tactic today? Because he was on the offensive the entire race.
Yeah, we said it in Diegem about Loenhout that there is one rider that is going to decide if they are going to take it easy or it's going to be a very fast race, and that's Van der Poel. And Van der Poel decided that he wanted to make a show out of it, to go as fast as he could in the first lap, put them under pressure, and in a way you can definitely understand it because I think he definitely put Van Aert multiple times on the back foot and he had to defend, there was a gap and he had to chase him back. But I think that if you look at Van der Poel in terms of strategy, you could argue that it was maybe a bit too much, if you do something in the last lap and you create a gap there and you have something left in the tank, I think then you can maybe kill Van Aert and the chances of him getting back to you. But I think that by doing those multiple attacks, the sharpness of an attack is becoming less and less. And, you saw it in the last lap, the gap was there, but it was a gap that if you make a mistake, then it's going to be very difficult and that the others can always come back at such a point. And the gap was there, he made a mistake and Van Aert was back on the wheel. And then you already know that there's not much coming on the course and it's going to be a sprint. Like, if he didn't make the mistake and, he actually maintained the gap, you would have said that it was a great race from his side and a very aggressive and way of riding. But he didn't. And then obviously we're going to criticize him a little bit more. But I think in the end, it was an amazing battle to watch for the neutral viewer for sure.
Yeah, I don't think we really need to criticize his tactics. I mean, okay, his first lap was insanely fast. It was ridiculous. And his team manager, Christophe Roodhoofd, also said that they thought, at least within the staff, that maybe a slower start would have been more appropriate, but Van der Poel went all or nothing. He was racing like a child who had a straw and a couple of wads of paper. And every lap he would take one or two of these wads of paper and fire them at the helmet of Van Aert. And every lap he would try to crack that helmet, try to crack Van Aert. And at some point it seemed to work, because just before the halfway point of the race, there was some talk on the Belgian broadcast that Van Aert might even have a puncture. But in reality, Van Aert just didn't have an answer or a response to Van der Poel firing these wads at him. Van der Poel was firing Slavo after Slavo and trying to crack him on the technical sections. And Pidcock eventually needed to get Van Aert back into the race. It was a similar scenario to in Diegem, where at the halfway point of the race, Pidcock reinitiated the chase in Van Aert and allowed Van Aert to come back. Of course, Van Aert, just like in Diegem, put in a big effort on the road to close the gap to Pidcock, but still, that was a turning point in the race, because if Pidcock doesn't have the legs or the ability to close that gap to Van der Poel is probably gone at the halfway point of the race again, because Van Aert at that point was close to cracking. It then doesn't work because also Van der Poel has his limits, he can't keep going and needs to rest a bit after that. But the tactic was clear, he knew where his strong parts on the course were and he utilized that to the maximum. But then we come to this other key element, and that's timing. Timing needs to be good. Van der Poel was flawless for the entire race, makes one mistake, and that mistake cost him the win. That's just how cross goes. You need to be flawless or without mistakes on the moment that it matters the most. And that is, not coincidentally, also the moment that it's the hardest to stay focused and sharp. And that's the final lap. Pressure is on, you're going deep, you're tired, and then he just chooses the wrong rut, because the rut there, it caused some issues early in the race for Pidcock as well. He was professionally avoiding that in most of the previous laps, but in the final lap he lands in it and it catapults him to the other side where you don't want to be, and that's unfortunate, but that's how cross is, and it gave us a very nice plot twist in the end and a very royal sprint in the end.
Yeah, indeed, a royal sprint, because I think that if it wasn't for that mistake, we might have not seen that sprint, because I think that Van Aert, he wasn't really looking behind, and that was also not really necessary, because Pidcock was definitely going to be third if the mistake wasn't made, and in the end he also ended third in the sprint, but then at least, he had a connection with the two in front. But I think that in the end, that mistake is what led to this decision, or to the decisive moment of a sprint. And the sprint, Van der Poel leading, somebody that is arguably maybe close to you or even a little bit better. He did it in the Tour of Flanders, but this time the reaction was just a tiny bit too late. Van Aert, started very well, was very confident, was able to sprint till the finish line, and that's what that's what you need to do to, in the end, win the sprint. And Van der Poel definitely tried everything, but was only able to manage second. And I think in the end, it doesn't really matter who won and who was second. I think that is beautiful to watch these guys going at it. And yeah, that is a sprint. The sprint is always the smallest of margins. That is what counts. And you can always overanalyze something in terms of a sprint. You shouldn't be doing that. It was in the end Van Aert that deserved the win, because he was constantly chasing Van der Poel and not letting him completely go. So I think in the end everybody came on his place. Van der Poel, without a mistake, was going to be first, but that's how it goes.
I think that Van der Poel in the sprint was a bit distracted by Pidcock, because Pidcock was never really in this race to win it until that sprint. He was consistently making mistakes, and we'll come to that a bit later. First, stick to the sprint, because Van der Poel was super alert that Pidcock could come from behind with the overspeed and an attack, and that didn't work out. And I think that normally, if Pidcock wasn't there, Van der Poel would have attacked over the barriers and made it a super long sprint. Why? because Van der Poel, we could see it in, I think, lap 3, 4 and 5 especially, that he was opening a solid gap of almost a second over those barriers because he's faster on the bunny hops than Van Aert. I think that's a free second, and he would have launched from there in the hope to crack Van Aert. And even if he didn't, it's easier to focus on one rider than on three, and he started the sprint in the worst position. He was leading out the group, and Van Aert times his launch into perfection. Van Aert is in the third wheel. He knows he needs to make it a long sprint, and he has a finishing straight which suits him. It's a super long straight. And at the moment Van der Poel turns his head back from looking behind what's happening, he launches. Van der Poel never saw that coming because he turned his head back. He doesn't have eyes in the back of his head, so Van Aert, perfection there. Pidcock didn't have the legs or the energy anymore to really factor in the sprint. And by the time that Van der Poel sees Van Aert come up to speed, he also reacts, and his acceleration is pretty impressive, but because of the length, everything fell into its piece for Van Aert. I mean, Van der Poel looked to have the good cards in the early phase of the race. He looked to have a straight flush, but on the final finishing straight, it turned out to be that Van Aert had the royal flush in his hand, and everything fell together for him, which led to him winning the sprint. And that sprint was a thing of a beauty because the speed, power of Van Aert, the timing, everything was perfect for him. I'm still waiting for him to sprint like this in the Tour of Flanders once, because then in those sprints on the road of smaller groups, he never really seems to get things as perfect as today.
Well, that was definitely good practice, so maybe he can take that experience with him into the road races. But Pidcock definitely played a factor in that sprint because, like you said, Van der Poel and also Van Aert, they both kind of noticed that he was coming, especially because the pace was dropped in such a way that somebody that was close by, or at least not that far off, would be able to return. And I think both didn't have any issues with that, but they just didn't want to be surprised by him. And I think that Pidcock almost was able to do so, but they just noticed him, and then at that time it killed the momentum for Pidcock. And I think, you know, the barriers there close to the finish could have played a role if Pidcock was not there. I think that Van der Poel would have tried, maybe use the barriers, get a small second, maybe 2 seconds out of Van Aert there, and then you have a gap already, and then Van Aert needs to close that gap first before you can actually do something in terms of sprinting for victory. And I think that could have been a different scenario, and that would have been interesting to see. But with Pidcock, Van der Poel cannot take such a risk because, you know, you jump the barriers. Pidcock is able to jump those barriers also quite quickly, and then yeah, you have a risk of pulling everybody, and that's just not really going to work. So Pidcock played a factor, and as always the case when it's a sprint of two, it is actually easier to, you know, to have the guy in control and to not be surprised by his you know, when he initiates his sprint. But when you are with three, it's always a little bit more difficult because the one behind, the guy that's behind you, if you're leading the sprint, can always surprise you in a way that you do not expect. And if you have to control one guy, it's always easier than when you have to control two guys.
Yeah, it is easier, and I think that in the end it's a beautiful thing that it comes down to a sprint. But at the same time, I've noticed a couple of things, and just like in Zolder, if there was pressure coming from one rider, it was Van der Poel. If Van der Poel took the lead, there would be pressure on Van Aert. Today we saw that almost every single lap. It was Van der Poel who applied the pressure on Van Aert. And in Diegem, it kind of was the same thing. Until the insane turnaround by Van Aert, which completely cracked Van der Poel, it was Van der Poel who applied the pressure on Van Aert. In Gavre, it was Van der Poel who applied the pressure on Van Aert. In Mol, it was usually Van der Poel who applied pressure on Van Aert. But still, Van Aert is the guy who has his hands in the air the most of the time. And Van der Poel today technically was so much better than Van Aert that he was pretty easily able to apply pressure on Van Aert. But it's not the same Van der Poel, at least relatively to Van Aert, that we saw a couple of seasons ago. A couple of seasons ago, Van der Poel would also open a gap technically, and then Van Aert, whatever he did, he couldn't come closer on the straights. And then you come to the next technical section, and 3 seconds become 5, and 5 become 8. And before you knew it, Van der Poel had 20 seconds, and he would consolidate 20 seconds and he would win with something between 20 and 40 seconds. Now we see it differently. Van der Poel is still technically much better, but Van Aert is able to close the gap on the power sections. And of course, he was lucky with the rain today, because when the juniors raced today, the course was super fast, but it transformed into a mud bath today. It's just a bit weird, because I have at least had the impression over the past couple of races that Van der Poel was the one who put Van Aert under pressure, but somehow Van Aert keeps coming back, and I think this tells you something about the strength of Van Aert, and especially about the mental strength, because we've discussed this before, he just never gives up. It's just an interesting trend that I've noticed, that I think at this point Van der Poel is technically better, but Van Aert is slightly better physically. But then at the same time, if I think at the most physical cross we've seen this cross period, it was Gavere, and that was won by Van der Poel. So that's a bit confusing, but I do still stand by it that I think Van der Poel is better technically and Van Aert better physically.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's, especially today as well, was quite visible that Van der Poel could put Van Aert on the pressure purely on technique and on in the sections where you can utilize the technique the most. You could even, with Pidcock as well, you could see that Pidcock was technically going through corners just a little bit better than Van Aert. If somebody is able to put you on the pressure with his technique, but you are able to come back, it means that you have something over the other guy in front of you, and that must then be the power. I think that Van Aert today in Loenhout, the way he was riding on the straights to close the gap, when Van der Poel had a gap and Pidcock was actually in between them, it was with such ease. That is, the TGV stroke again there, and it is an amazing ability that he has. The way he can utilize that power, if he can close a gap if there's not a lot of technique that has to be used there compared to Van der Poel. I don't think that Van Aert is definitely the worst guy on the bike, but the difference between him and Van der Poel is visible. But it's Gavere definitely. If Gavere was a race where Van Aert won, then it was for us, I think, a little bit easier to say, okay, Van Aert is at the moment a little bit better than Van der Poel. But Van der Poel won, like you said, probably the most physical race, if you could call it like that, and definitely the most, a race that you would definitely say, maybe with a little bit more rain and more mud, that is that is perfect for Van Aert. And Van der Poel won. So yeah, it's for us, it's still difficult. There are some races that are coming up, and hopefully we can see a fair fight, and maybe after Zonhoven we have a better idea of what the situation is.
If we then look at the guy in third, Pidcock, he definitely rode a good race. He impressed me because it was a pretty terrible course for him. Flat, no elevation, bad start-finish straight for him, it was super long. He even messed up his start quite horribly. And then the mud, yeah, I thought he would struggle here, but again he impressed me. He did have a relatively bad start, but he recovered super well from it. He had a terrible initial getaway, but with a move around the outside in turn 1, even unclipping, taking a lot of extra risks, he saved himself. And that was crucial to his race, because the first lap of Van der Poel was so fast, he would have never been able to recover from starting in 10th or 12th. So that was super crucial to his race. And I think he now is, like I talked about, the lack of focus, and that is kind of gone. I feel like he knows the essence of a good start now, and he really goes for it. He knows, if I mess up my start like in Zolder, I'm done. Zolder seemed to be a bit of an eye-opener for him, and since then in Diegem and also today in Loenhout, there was fire in his starts, and that was good to see. And to then still, okay, make mistakes, fine, but still stay in the race, of course, because the pace drops, is pretty impressive on a course that doesn't suit him at all.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's if you would have told me a week ago that Pidcock was going to be battling it out with Van der Poel and Van Aert on a course like Loenhout, I would be saying, I mean, yeah, maybe for 1 or 2 laps, and then the difference will be there. But Pidcock definitely impressed me over the course of this week, and it's he definitely made a step in terms of improvements in these type of courses where you would say that he would struggle. He was actually able to be very close to those two guys, and that's definitely promising. That's good to see. It's actually great to see. And the question is then, what is next for him? Because is he going to be able, he has this disadvantage in terms of weight. He's a relatively lightweight, quote unquote, compared to Van der Poel and Van Aert, who on a course like this, you definitely want to have some sort of body to get through the mud, and a lightweight like Pidcock on a course like this definitely has a disadvantage. So I think what he is doing right now is very good to see, and that is the steps that you need to make to, in the end, become the best cyclocross rider of the world.
And Pidcock made the race so much harder for himself. I mean, in the mud it looked like he was being thrown around by these ruts, partly because he was choosing the wrong ones, but also partly because of his lack of weight, that he had less weight to pressure on his wheels and compensate for being thrown out one side. But then the second thing that especially hampered him in the first part of the race was his pitbox allocation, because in the second pit zone it was quicker to pit than to ride, and Pidcock, he had in the beginning of the race box 1, and that meant that out of the corner he needed to accelerate for about 2-3 seconds and then come to an abrupt halt, get on his bike and speed up, whilst Van Aert was changing in the middle and Van der Poel to the end of the pit box. And it's not only just the bad timing of changing, because he needs to accelerate, come to an halt and accelerate basically from standstill again, whilst the others can accelerate and change at a relatively high speed and continue going. So it wasn't only that, it was also that once he remounted, there was a big puddle of water there, which meant that he couldn't accelerate quickly enough. He lost a lot of time by doing so. Van Aert had the best spot to change. For him it was smooth, it was relatively fast there. For Van der Poel it was okay. Luckily Pidcock's mechanics moved, even though it's technically not allowed during the race, but there were no sanctions on it. So he moved, but still he was remounting somewhere around this puddle, which meant it was far from ideal. It's unfortunate because on paper there should have been allocated pit boxes. I know that this hasn't been the case with all C1 races this season, that they actually implemented them. But if there were allocated pit boxes, it means that they needed to assign pit boxes yesterday. And yesterday the course was still looking fast, so they might have anticipated something else. But it definitely made Pidcock's race a lot harder. But still then, it was impressive that on a course which is basically raw power and technique, he was able to stay in this race for so long and fight for it. And I will once again ask Pidcock to please race the World Championships, because him being up there at the front added another dynamic to it, and that certainly made the race even more entertaining than it already was. Let's take a look at the entire top 10 then. Van Aert with a win ahead of Van der Poel and Pidcock. Cameron Mason in 4th ahead of Gerben Kuipers and Thomas Mien. 7th place went to Thijs Aerts ahead of Wietse Meeuwse in 8th. Timo Kielich ends 9th with Niels van de Putte in 10th. We have to talk here about the two Brits, Issam. Cameron Mason and Thomas Mien. 3 Brits in the top 6. Impressive stuff, and let's start with Cameron Mason, 4th place. Absolutely fantastic for him.
I don't know if I can say that it was a surprise, but it was definitely an outstanding performance from his side. I think that these are one of the races where obviously the field is not at its most competitive. We miss some of the riders that could have fought for that 4th place. But then to, doing what you have to do and still get that 4th place, we have seen from him that he is in a quite a good form, and he is improving race by race. But this is an outstanding performance. I think it's it confirms everything that that he kind of has the ability, that he is a talent, that he is somebody that you can expect in the future to even perform better than he is doing right now. Obviously, we saw the sprint, and then after the sprint, it was a little bit of waiting, and then we saw Cameron Mason. I was like, oh, okay, that's quite a surprise, because in the broadcast we saw him 2-3 times, but I think in the end for him it was also a surprise. Till the last lap, he didn't know what position he was fighting for, and then in the end he kind of knew it was going to be for 4th place, and yeah, to then hold it is amazing. And
yeah, I mean, for both riders, it has somewhat been coming. I mean, Mason is having a very good season. He raced the national trophy in Falkirk in October, then was out, and basically only properly started his season in Dublin. He did a lot of gravel and mountain bike stuff over the summer and wanted a proper rest, and it seems to be working because Dublin, Gavre, both World Cup top 10s. 15th in Diegem is also a solid result, and now 4th. It just keeps getting better, and it's promising. He can definitely hope for a top 10 at the World Championships, despite today not being the most stacked cross. Then Thomas Mean, he is having a bit of a rough season. The beginning of the season wasn't amazing for him in some of the less packed races. For instance, Bering, I remember seeing him not far outside of the top 10. Tabor World Cup, he didn't make a good impression on me when I was there either. Koppenberg, he was 9th, not great on a course that really suits him with a not so great starting field. But things have been improving ever so slightly recently. In Diegem, we could already see he was 12th. In Gavre, he was also improving, 20th in a super packed race. And now he gets a top 10. Yes, I think for him it's a bigger factor than for Mason, the fact that quite some riders were missing. No Van Loenhout, no Iserbyt, no Van der Haar, no Nieuwenhuis, etc. But he did it. Good job, 6th place, impressive, and I mean, he did benefit from other riders not doing that well. Corné van Kessel, last race for Tormans, 12th place. A teammate of him, Quinten Hermans, DNF. We don't know what happened to him, but he was already struggling in the first part of the race, so I'm outside of the top 10. I think he didn't really like today's course. I think we do need to mention a rider who is actually making the opposite move, well, not necessarily the opposite move, Thijs Aerts. From Baloise Trek, he's joining Tormans. He will race for them on the 1st of January, although they won't be called Tormans anymore, they will be just be called the Intermarché Wanty Cross Team. What did you think about Thijs Aerts' race and his move to the Wanty Cross Team, Issam?
If we talk about his move first, I think that was a move, I wouldn't say expected, but it was obviously rumored that him and his brother would move to Tormans, Intermarché, whatever it's going to be called at the 1st of January. But that was going to be his move. Then it also came out. I think it's an okay sign. I wouldn't be saying the same thing if he was signed 2-3 weeks ago, because I think the results were not really at a level that I think Thijs Aerts is. But I think with Loenhout, it was definitely a solid result, and those are results that I think Tormans or Intermarché would be very happy with. So I think that for him, it's I think for the team it was almost a transfer where if you sign Toon Aerts, then you sign Thijs Aerts. Toon Aerts obviously is not going to be signed. That's still something that is open. And Thijs Aerts is available, so then probably that contract was laying there. Thijs Aerts doesn't really have a team, I think, for next season, so he had to be at one team anyways. And I think that then it was the best decision for him and for Intermarché as well to just sign him and go with him. And I think that it's a solid signing and definitely a good addition to the team.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I feel like it's not an amazing signing, because ever since he had that incident where parts of his fingers needed to be cut off, amputated, he hasn't been the same. And last year was a huge struggle to get top 10s, and at least in the main races needed to go to some races outside of Belgium to collect points to try and do well, and it was hard. And there was this story that Toon didn't know if his brother could stay pro, and there was some speculation that the decision of Toon Aerts to move away from Baloise Trek was because Baloise Trek actually didn't want to re-sign Thijs, and he wanted to go somewhere where he could race together with his brother, and that Tormans could offer that. And to me it feels like a bit of a scam, not in the literal sense of a scam, but I indeed have the feeling that it was a package deal for Tormans, or I must try and say Wanty now, that they get both Toon. They get Toon, the big package is Toon, and Toon brings Thijs with him, which is normal for big riders to bring a rider with them. I mean, Zweek did the same with his brother. They raced all in Era, and it's pretty normal. It's pretty common, also on the road. So now they only end up with Thijs, and as you say, Thijs Aerts hasn't had the best season, and still it's not great. I mean, 7th today. It's not an amazing start field that was there today, let's be honest. I mean, it's okay result, but it's also not something that would make me think, oh, he's finding the good form again. I just think it's ultimately not in him anymore after that incident with his finger. I would like to end the men's part of the podcast now with a mention of some names outside of the top 10. Thought it was nice to see Curtis White, Loris Rouillet and Michael Crispin fight close to the top 10. They were in it for a while, actually. I was pretty surprised to see Crispin there. Of course, he's a former European champion under 23 in Civel, which was a huge surprise back then. And it was surprising that it was in the top 10. And despite not the best start field, it was a decent showing by him. And I will end then to mention that Zdenek Štibar also raced today. He ended 17th. Let's quickly go on to the women's podcast then. Again, not to disrespect the women's race, but we will be keeping it quite short simply because the race was not that entertaining. Marius Schreiber had the best start, but towards the end of the lap, Shirin van Anrooij overtook her and immediately opened the gap. It was basically race over. Shirin van Anrooij made a solo slim from it. 15 seconds became 20 seconds, and that became a minute, and then she stabilized and won the race ahead of Marius Schreiber, who was actually racing together with the Czech champion Kristina Zemanova for a while. About the halfway point of the race, Zemanova, however, faded, and that meant that Schreiber was able to keep that second place. Unfortunately, we couldn't see all too much about the battle for third place, but that one was super intense because going into the penultimate lap, we had Manon Bakker, who had caught up with a big group in the wheel to Zemanova. So Zemanova was there with Bakker, but Kay was there, Bentveld, Modegraaf, Burkay. It was a big scrap, but we didn't see all too much, except that Manon Bakker opened a small gap going into the final lap and managed to keep that. So that made the podium Van Anrooij, Schreiber and Bakker. Van Anrooij now won 3 out of the 4 crosses she raced this Christmas period, Issam. We can either repeat ourselves and again conclude that she came back strong from the Trek training camp, is choosing a wise program, or we can talk about something else around her. There is the rumor, at least it was mentioned by Michael Wuits, the Belgian commentator, who said that Van Anrooij is probably going to skip the Dutch national championships and race the world championships with the under 23s. What's your thought on both of the decisions? One, to go training during the national championships and give up a potential title, and two, race with the under 23s while she's one of the best elite riders and give away a shot at the elite rainbow jersey.
I think that the nationals, it is a decision that you can make. I can understand from her point of view that, you know, an under 23 championships, Dutch championships will do nothing for her. You know, an elite championships is, I wouldn't say difficult, but it's not a guarantee for her. You know, a podium is always nice, but it can, you know, it's when you're going to do championship, you need to be fully committed, which means that you are not able to, or you have to come back from a training camp. And I can understand that, especially because she also wants to have a very good road season. So then maybe in the preparation with Trek, they might have a training camp planned and she wants to join that training camp, or the team asked her to join that training camp. And, you know, we have seen the same decision with Van Aert and Van der Poel. So it's definitely a trend at the moment. But I think that, you know, from her side, that I would understand in a way. The, you know, world championships, I think it would be... was a nice way of saying it, but for me, I wouldn't be doing it, especially because she is definitely somebody that could be on the podium in the elite category, and I personally think that on a good day she's able to put Pietersen and Van Empel under pressure, who we can expect as the main favorites, but it's still a bit too early, especially for Van Empel. But normally those are the two that are going to be the main favorites, and I think then, you know, you should be, especially as in Van Anrooij, I mean, what are you going to do with an under 23 title other than saying 2-3 years later, okay, I won the under 23 title, and it's, for me, it's, I wouldn't say meaningless, because it's still a race, and you get a jersey, and it's the experience, and you can, it's something that helps in your palmarès. But no, I would definitely choose the elites, and I hope she does, because I definitely think she has a fair shot of doing so.
Yeah, it's a world title that you can add, but I would agree that a medal in the elite category is more prestigious than a world title in the under 23 category, which you can never show, because you can never wear that jersey. Only at the under 23 world or European championships, so I don't really see the added value of a title there, except that what Niels Albert brought up during the broadcast, that it's maybe something that at the end of your career you can say, well, I became world champion in all categories, junior woman under 23, which she doesn't have, and then hopefully she can add an elite title later. But it seems a bit of a title that you would then only have for bragging rights, and that would seem a bit silly. I think she's proven that she has the level to race with the elites, she has the level to beat the elites, she even has the ability to win elite World Cups. With the form she has now, I would indeed say it's probably the best if she races with the elites, but it's probably based on personal preference, so we'll need to accept that choice. And for the World Championships or the National Championships, I can understand the choice to skip it if you think that the training camp will help you better. She also has priorities on the road, and let's be honest, the National Championships are very poorly timed this year in the middle of January, when many road teams are also on training camp, so I would say that makes sense. Then about some other riders. Marie Schreiber in second. Were you surprised that she ended second?
The way she did it, I would say. And I, before the race, I would have probably put Bakker ahead of her. But yeah, I think that in the end that was just a little bit too much for Bakker, and Schreiber started well, as she always does. Didn't really have that drop that she normally has, was able to maintain quite a good pace on a course that suits her quite well, and then was able to, she had Zemanova in her wheel, but didn't really look too much to her, just, was focusing on her own race, didn't make that many mistakes, and there were definitely some moments behind her where they were looking too much to each other, and she had big profit from that, and was able to, maintain the gap that she had. And I think for her it's a huge result to be on the podium with the elites in a televised race, which has some value and some attention, especially with with Van Anrooij in first. I think it's always nice to be on the podium with such a big name, and I think for her as a talent, it's rewarding the amount of races that she's doing, and a fifth place and a sixth place, it's always nice to have, but if you're on the podium, it hits just a little bit different.
I'm not really surprised that she ends on the podium, and I think her race was just like most others she did. She was, yes, having a fast start, but I don't think she normally really pays the price for having a fast start, at least differently than she did today. Today her second lap was a bit smaller, but because of the nature of the course really suiting her, she loves a flat course and a bit of mud, it was not super surprising that despite losing some time on the chasers, she eventually found her second breath and managed to drop Zemanova. Zemanova also impressed me, and for some part I thought that she was really going to surprise by ending on the podium, but she really faded, got a bit too excited in all of the action, but still a very solid showing. We said it in our Zolder podcast that you should probably not be too surprised if you hear this name a couple of more times in the future, and today was one of the first times, but it also showed that there is still work to do for her.
Yeah, still a little work to do. I think that if she would have a little bit more conservative at the start, it might have helped her out later on in the race. I think she tried too long to stay with Schreiber, and I think that was obviously at that point probably for her the best thing to do. But then you kind of blow up, you get caught by the other women behind you who were able to, I would say, do a different pace. We're not on the limit all the time, and then it's kind of difficult to battle with those women. And especially mentally, it's quite hard to battle anyways, because you already been caught, and yeah, then it's going to be difficult. But it's it's a young talent. It's a talent that is definitely a bit, I would say, bit unnoticed because of the talent that we already have at the front with like a Van Anrooij and with the Pietersen and Van Empel. But she's also definitely somebody that is that has definitely some abilities that needs to grow, and give her some time, and probably the results later on will hopefully show it for itself, and then you will see the talent.
I mean, today was just a talent auction because all riders were riding like they needed to impress bidders. Look at my talent. Some numbers from the top 10. We know Van Anrooij is 20. She's had a lot of shine on her already in the past couple of years. But Schreiber, just 19 years old, second year under 23. In fourth, 17 years old, second year junior, Laura Molengraaf. 19 years old in fifth, Lien Burquier, second year under 23. First year under 23 in sixth, Leonie Bentveld. Second year under 23, Zemanova in 7th. Foucounet, also an under 23, maybe a bit older one, in 9th. Madigan Munro, also an under 23, was in the top 10 for a while, ended just outside of it. Millie Cousins, ended 12th, also just 19 years old. So much talent coming through in this race, and okay, Vash and Vorst, they forfeited last minute. Other riders decided to prioritize other classified races. Probably a bit of a shame for Loenhout that they didn't have all the big names at the start that they maybe would have wanted, but on the other hand, it gives us a nice opportunity to look at some talent that we've had on our radar for longer and see them at full display. And for today, Molengraaf really impressed me. She's just a second year junior, and I think it's a good reference. Last year as a first year junior, she raced against Bentveld. Bentveld made some steps, but Molengraaf looks to have made some more steps because today she beat Bentveld.
Yeah, indeed. I think Molengraaf definitely had I would say, a small advantage with the barriers that did help her. But yeah, I think that it's I actually wanted to mention that about the way the women's race was broadcasted, especially in the last lap when you have such a battle and you have those women, young talent, fighting it out. I think, like you said, it was quite a big group with Bakker and Molengraaf, Burquier, Bentveld, Zimanova. I think Kay was there as well. Foucounet, who crashed in the last lap, unfortunately. If you have all these names and you actually get, the only thing that you get is the moment that they cross the start-finish straight for the last lap, and then you see the finish of them when they cross the line, and there was no battle in front. I mean, Van Anrooij was sure to win from lap 2. Schreiber was alone in a way when Zimanova was not able to follow. So then normally you would be focusing more on third place, but for some odd reason it was the Van Anrooij show, and rightfully so that she gets some attention, but I think it was a bit too much in the last lap, and that was a bit of a shame because I definitely would have loved to see these youngsters get at it and try to battle it out for those places, because it's always nice to have a battle. Like you said, the racing was I would say a little bit boring compared to the men's race, but it doesn't really help if you're also going to show the one leading by a minute and then the number 2 he's leading by 30 seconds. So I think it's a bit, that was a bit off from the guy that is controlling the cameras and being the director of the race. And I mean, I've said it many times, and I think that for cyclocross there's huge improvements that can be made in terms of coverage, and hopefully we will see more improvements over this season, which is probably not going to happen, and over the next couple of seasons, because there is much work for cyclocross as a sport in terms of broadcasting.
Well, then I think we've covered it. I think there is not much more to say, although I would have loved to talk about the women's race a bit more, but I guess we'll need to do that in Baal. Thank you for being here then, Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me, and I guess it's the last podcast of the year as well, so we go into 2023 very soon, so I want to I think you want to do it as well. Thank the listeners and wish them all a very nice New Year's Eve, and hopefully the best that they can achieve in 2023, and a lot of hours listening to the podcast as well.
Yeah, of course, we wish everybody the best for the new year. Hopefully a nice New Year's Eve, and we will be back on New Year's Day when we will be discussing the third round of the X2O trophy taking place in Baal, the GP Sven Nys. Thanks for listening and goodbye.